Welcome everybody to the Depths of Motherhood podcast. This is a special season dedicated to the tribe of the mother, but also I know any mothers listening will find this extremely valuable. I've created each episode to offer simple, digestible, and supportive information, which I hope will educate and inspire anyone who listens. So this is by popular demand. Please help us to educate and support the tribe holding the mother. Look forward to passionate and highly knowledgeable guests dedicated to reclaiming the essence of birth and embracing conscious parenting. Throughout our time together, our guests will serve as the guiding voices, illuminating the path towards a deeper understanding of preconception, pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. This is with the mother and the baby being the center of the exploration. In the show notes, you'll discover the link to Nourished Mother package, which will offer many different resources to complement each episode. This is free for all members in the Women's Circle, or £33 for everybody who just wants to purchase the package. A heartfelt thank you to our incredible guests and immense gratitude to my partner for supporting me on this creation. And finally, last but not least, special thank you to Araya, my daughter, for being the endless well of inspiration. Welcome everybody. This is the last episode in season 7. This has been a long journey. From episode 78, where we began exploring preconception, then onto pregnancy and postpartum, finally finishing episode 119. I'm not really sure what is going to be happening with the months to come, if there will be a season 8, because nothing is coming through strongly for me right now. When I began this podcast with my dear friend Angelica in 2021, it really came from this fire inside that was looking to be fed. I had a huge gap in my knowledge around my own body, around pregnancy and motherhood, and there was no one around that I could explore this with. And during that time, so many of us were in isolation, and the podcast was a way for me to connect, to feed that hunger that was inside of me, and to support other families and mothers. Thanks to everyone who's joined me on the podcast and to everybody who's been supporting this podcast. It has been quite the journey. If the fire reemerges with something that wants to come through, then I will be here. But creating this podcast takes a lot of time for me to prepare, to record, to edit, to put it out, and the amount of hours that I'm sat touching my computer, having the electrical energy move through me. Yeah, it's been many hours. I haven't calculated it, but I know that it's a lot. And I can feel my resistance to being sat with my computer. And this is with no regret with what has been created. I deeply trust what has come through has been necessary for myself and for the collective. And now I have to honor this sensation inside of me that is telling me to withdraw. And it feels like everything's aligning because in a few weeks we're returning back to our physical community. This is the last episode that I pre-recorded. I'm almost finished the second edition of my book, Reclaiming Circle, a guide to hosting women's circles. And also I'm noticing a decline in the attendance in the lives. And that is perfectly okay. I'm just witnessing the transition back into the real physical world. Like we've come to the point where we've received the information, we've been sat with our computers, and now the nature, the physical world is calling us back. So if you're following my personal page, you'll also see I've had a real big clean out. I just feel like I don't want so much of my life exposed online. I want to keep this personal and private for me. And something happened recently with my daughter where somebody sent a private message to me asking for information about my daughter. And this made me feel really, really uncomfortable. And I realized that even though I don't share her face on my social media, I do share her progression. I do share her personality. And this is all without her permission. So yeah, there's some things that have made this transition a little bit easier and more clear. And I just want to say thank you for following my journey over the last 4 years. So today, in our last episode, we welcome Elizabeth Greaves. Elizabeth is married to Chris, who we had on the podcast. I will leave his episode in the show notes. His story was from the perspective of a father. Elizabeth and Chris have 3 daughters, and alongside being a mother, Elizabeth has a passion for understanding and sharing information on physiological birth to support other women and families through their pregnancy and postpartum, to offer them support so they can feel confident in making decisions that are aligned with their heart and their truth. I've left all her information in the show notes. In this conversation, Elizabeth's sharing her own personal experience of receiving an episiotomy without consent, something that we know happens far too often. And from this space, we go deeper into the discussion to look at natural tearing in birth and how the physiology of our bodies is designed to accommodate the arrival of our babies when we're supported and undisturbed. We talk about how different interventions can rush and affect the natural unfolding of birth, and how, in an undisturbed space, the mother and the baby work together to create this positive feedback loop to support the opening of the mother's body. And I asked Elizabeth, what do you think about perineal massage? Because that's actually how I found her. She remixed a reel on Instagram, which was talking about a product that you can use to prepare your perineum for birth so that you wouldn't tear. So she goes more into that and why she would not encourage it and what she would recommend instead. So the foundations of this conversation is really to get us back into a position of trusting our body, of making decisions to support our body with nourishing movements, food, hydration, intimacy, and it all comes as a beautiful reminder. So thank you so much, Elizabeth. I'm sending you so much love for your next phase of your journey, and I hope you all enjoy this conversation. Before we begin, let's just take a deep breath and check in with our body. Notice how the breath is moving today. Welcome yourself back home. Sending you so much love. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really looking forward to getting to know you more and learning from you as well.
Thank you so much for having me on here. I'm excited to talk.
And I spoke to your husband yesterday, so I've heard a bit about your birth story, which is really nice. So I feel like I know you. And depending on the way that these episodes go out, the episode with Elizabeth's husband, Chris, will be in the pregnancy section of this season. So I'll put the link in the show notes as well if you're curious. Today, we are going to be exploring vaginal tears and whether it's beneficial to prepare with massage or not. But before we do, I would love for you to share how you got into doing this work and what inspires you.
Fairly organically, I would say my entrance to motherhood, of course, when I was much younger, at the age of 19, that was something that definitely changed my life for the better. I fell in love with birth. I didn't know anything about birth, but I had experienced it and I had a very positive experience. And from then on, I was just like, every woman needs to experience this. Like it just makes sense. And I learned more throughout the years, but it was never something I knew I would eventually want to share more and help other women. But I just waited for the right time in my life. I was a young single mother for a while, and then I met my husband. We had 2 more girls, but particularly with our last birth, we experienced the journey we had from exiting the medical system and choosing to birth on our own at home really opened my eyes to a lot of struggles that mothers face in the system. And then a lot of fears that really just learning the physiology, learning knowledge about birth, relearning how to trust in our bodies. There's just so much to be said when we can implement that. And so through my journey, I shared that experience and got a lot of positive response. We shared our birth video on my social media. And yeah, I just been, like I said, it kind of just organically came. Like a lot of mothers had so many questions and I was able to answer them. And anything that I wasn't, I took the time to learn. And
Mm.
so through that, I've done a ton of research and just been able to provide them with the answers or the options that they didn't know they had, whether in the system or not. So, yeah,
Mm.
as far as who inspires me, women in general, mothers in general, peace. Yeah,
Wow, that's really
definitely.
beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And your husband was saying that in one of your births, they gave you an episiotomy without your permission.
Yeah.
Was that your first?
Yeah.
Second? Second.
That was with my second. Yeah, I was in the hospital, obviously. And it's funny because the one thing that I had really focused on with that birth was that I wanted to avoid tearing as much as possible. And so I had read and learned that positioning is really important for that. Being able to go into whatever position you feel instinctually to go into. And particularly hands and knees can take a lot of pressure off of the perineum. So I vividly remember I'm in transition and I mean, my daughter was getting ready to be born and I was on all fours and I was doing it and I was in the right headspace and the nurse kept insisting I need to flip over for the doctor. I wasn't in the right position for the doctor. And eventually I gave up the fight. I flipped over. And then later on, minutes after she was born, the doctor let me know how much she saved me from tearing. I was about to tear my urethra, but because she gave me the episiotomy, it made room for the baby. In the moment, I was like, "Oh, wow, that sounds terrible. Thank you so much." But knowing what I know now, that was completely unnecessary. And had I just been able to birth in that position, that absolutely, I know without a doubt, wouldn't have happened. And I actually learned later on that that doctor is known for episiotomies. She just hands them out like candy. So I was just another woman on the conveyor belt with her knife. So yeah, it wasn't pleasant.
I get goosebumps every time I hear these kind of stories. And I'm sending I'm sending you so much love because I that part of us still exists inside of us, that them moments when these things happen to our bodies, and also the moments when we awaken to what's actually happened. And so I'm curious to, when did you realize, like, wow, this isn't right. This is not how it had to unfold.
I'm trying to think of when did I realize that. I think my 3rd pregnancy really there was so many things that I unlearned, realizing that no one needed to tell me when to push. That was a big eye opener. You go to the hospital and they'll tell you what to do. They'll tell you how to perform. And when I was pregnant with my 3rd, I just was like, okay, well, can I do these things on my own? I mean, so much of what happened in the hospital was just doctors, they were just in the way. I knew what I could do. I knew what I was capable of. And yeah, put it together and hearing stories. And I mean, it's just, yeah, it's that moment where you're like, wow, that was not necessary. A lot of the time, maybe I minimize my story because a lot of women go through some of the stories I hear. So I think maybe I push it aside. But when I really do think about it, it's like that's not okay. That's like, you know, female mutilation, really.
And that what you're saying of this feeling that our experience isn't worthy to be said because there's so many responses that will go along the lines of, well, the most important thing is that you and the baby are safe. And then suddenly the attention is moved away from you about to share something that wants to come through, to like move into this feeling of, yeah, that is true. And also, I went through this and my body is healing from somebody else's decisions. And even it might even be our own decision, but because of the lack of knowledge we have around physiological birth, I feel that just, I just want to say how grateful I am to you being able to like share your experience and also pull this wisdom out into your community to share this as well. Because for so many women, this just is not known because of the conditioned beliefs around how birth should look, and which almost always involves the medical system being involved.
Yeah, it's what we're conditioned to do and to be, well-behaved women. Um, It's a disconnect from our intuition completely. So
Yeah.
you're lucky. I mean, if you can lay there and you can advocate for yourself, it is luck, really.
So did this experience going into your third pregnancy, did the experience from the episiotomy draw you towards preparations to avoid tearing? And like, how did that look as you start to get information about, well, how can I avoid tearing?
Yeah, you know what? I'll be honest. I've never feared that. I've never had a fear around tearing, and it wasn't anything that really came up. I sort of accepted, okay, I was not treated with respect to my last birth. That was not necessary. And so this time around, what my body will do what it needs to do. And yeah, I wasn't focused on tearing. I know that that's a huge fear for a lot of women. Again, it just wasn't, I knew what my body was capable of doing. And so it wasn't a focus. But again, understanding the physiology, understanding the anatomy, it just makes so much sense. And I wasn't trying to avoid tearing. I was preparing my body to do whatever it needed to do if that does involve physiological tearing, which looks completely different than tearing in a medicalized birth.
Mm. So what do you think about the massages, the perineal massage, the massages that are encouraged? And I mean, so many women are getting their information from social media right now, and it's one of the things that seems to be pushed out. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, and it's so interesting because it's a lot of women that are promoting this, and it's so deeply rooted in, like, misogyny when you think about it. The idea that we have to prepare our perineum for birth, it just puts the blame back on women that we're not built to birth. We have to constantly be doing things, and so if we do tear, it's our fault. We didn't do enough of this. We were better off with the episiotomy and all of it. So I think it's completely unnecessary. And the research behind it is very flawed. There's a Cochrane review, which is, somewhat of a gold standard for research. And people seem to pull out that perineal massage is beneficial. But what it actually concluded was that women who, in first time births, who massaged their perineum leading up to birth, were not less likely to tear, they were less likely to get an episiotomy. So that's an external factor that has to do with their provider and whether or not their provider decided in that moment. And when I say decided, it means it's based off absolutely no evidence. They'll just decide if their time's up or your time's up and they, want to cut you and move this along or, proceed with instrumental birth. So the evidence actually shows that it's not beneficial at all. Um, yeah. So no, I'm not for any perennial massage.
Thank you for sharing that. I'll find maybe you already have the papers as well, and we can put this in the show notes if people really like to get juicy into the research side of things. When I was giving birth, I had to go to the clinic. In the very last minute, I was having a home birth, and in that moment, so my baby's head, like it was crowning, and I went whilst I was in transition. You know, the moments where you're like, I can't do this anymore. So I was like, I went in after 28 hours, and then the doctor pushed his hand down on my vagina, and it tore from that. And I didn't know this happened. I only know because my partner was there and he was watching and he told me what happened. And so it's like there's so many factors that can contribute to it. And it's very, I feel like listening to mother's stories, like the whole journey, you can really get a bigger picture of what is actually happening. It's not like in isolation when there is any tearing. Could you explain the degrees of vaginal tearing as they would speak of them in medical terms?
Yeah. So they base it on 4 different degrees. The first degree of a tear would be, and this is all focused on the perineum. So the first degree would be through the skin and the first layers of that. A second degree would then be going into the muscle of the perineum. A third degree is going to start getting into the anal sphincter. And then, so if you're picturing like the perineum down here and then the anus here, we're working down. So now we're through skin, muscle, and now we're entering that sphincter tissue. And then a fourth degree would be right down. And now you're getting into like the rectum, the mucous membrane of the rectum. So that would be quite a dramatic tear.
Mm. Could you share some things that can like contribute to potential tearing? Because I know this is one of the things that is a fear that comes up a lot in our community.
Yeah. So I like to think of birth, in its most natural, undisturbed state. And that is generally going to be the most protective in, a physiological, undisturbed birth, where the mother is in tune with her body and her baby. She's able to move around. And so anything that veers away from that, anything that can be a disturbance to that, can potentially contribute to an unwanted tear. Look, I mean, hospital births are unfortunately just you're up against so much. Just any sort of medication, whether it's Pitocin, which is going to speed up contractions, and that baby is coming down in a very irregular pattern that can get them in different funky positions. Epidurals are going to numb the oxytocin receptors, which are so needed for that mom to stay in tune. Even when the baby is down into the vaginal canal and their head applying pressure, the pressure is applying on stretch receptors, which is allowing the vagina to open up more. And then that triggers more oxytocin. And then it's like a feedback loop, a positive feedback loop. So the increased oxytocin is helping to open up and it's helping to prevent any major tearing. So anything that's numbing that, anything that's taking away from that hormonal matrix is definitely going to increase your chances. Of course, anything like you said, fingers inside, forceps, vacuum, trying to think of what else. I mean, those are very common things. So, positioning, the typical positioning of a mother being on her back like that, you're again, you're up against so much. It's almost inevitable. Any coached pushing, forceful pushing, yeah, that's really gonna help contribute to a good tear.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. And it really does come down to the education around physiological birth of what our body is capable of, what it knows what to do. And when there is external influence in that journey, then our body will react differently as well. So these points are really wonderful that you are sharing. And because you shared that you had an episiotomy on your second, did anybody tell you that there is going to be more likelihood that you will tear on your next in childbirth the next time because you have the scar tissue?
I think maybe like initially I had met with some midwives in that pregnancy. They may have mentioned it. No, no one really put that on me. And wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have stopped me from trusting my body. It's funny that I know women who have had free births or undisturbed births where they had torn previously and there has been scar tissue built up. And then the birth afterwards actually helps to heal that, whether
Mm.
it tears it more to break up that tissue. Um, and it's actually it helps to heal that previous scar or however it had pieced together. So they won't tell you that though.
Right. I had an incredible conversation with Ellen Heed, who works with scar tissue and pelvic care specifically. That podcast is incredible for anyone who's listening. I'll leave the link in the show notes. And she's just talking about working with the scar tissue as one of the main pillars of healing. So, for anyone who's listening who has experienced any injury, tearing, any episiotomy during childbirth, or any injuries from any other reason, in the pelvis, just listen to that podcast because it's really incredible and it really just connects the dots on how we're connected on so many levels and how working with scar tissue can really help to integrate past experiences and move us over this bridge so that we can be fully present for the next experiences that are coming. I'm curious because For people listening now, maybe they're preparing to give birth. And even though everything that you've said is amazing and they're like, yeah, okay, but is there anything that I can do now? Do you think there's any preparations at all for these mothers that are like, yeah, but I kind of just want to like do something? Would you recommend there's anything that mothers can do?
Yeah, yeah. I actually, whether whether they want to hear this or not, I totally get it. But I actually think that sex is such a great way to get the whole area primed for birth, specifically orgasming. So whether that is, if you're feeling uncomfortable with penetration, there's other ways, of course, we can get creative. And, as long as you're enjoying it, of course, I really think that intensity, the contracting of the vaginal walls is so, so good. The lubrication that happens. I really stand by that. And to me, that is so much more intuitive than, okay, honey, get the oil and, it's time to do my perineum massage. I mean, it's just really not. It's so methodical and like clinical almost. I personally would much rather.
I remember back to like I was calling in my partner. I was like, "Hey, come and help me out," because I was doing a perineal massage. I think I did it like 3 times, and I just like didn't. I'd read somewhere, okay, this is the thing to do because it was one of my fears, and I remember, and I can almost feel like his finger like putting it on, and it just feels. And the thought back, the sensation feels so weird, like so strange because I couldn't reach anyway. Like my belly was so big. But I really was like very horny and like just before I gave birth. I think just the blood flow going to my womb, like preparing, and I was really horny. So I did have a lot of sex at the very end of my pregnancy, like not at all through the rest of it, but the last like month. And I wonder, maybe the body just knows it's like you get in there because it's gonna support you. No, you've said it. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense.
Totally. I mean, they even sell device like I've seen. I think you may have like found me from that reel that I did a stitch on where they're selling and promoting these. Uh, I don't know. I mean, I didn't look into it much, but I guess they're designed to prep you. And I'm like, but why don't you use your husband? Like, and to be honest, like, the research is very clear on those as well. I will say that they actually can increase damage to the anal sphincter. So
Mm.
those are also so unnecessary. So if anyone's wondering about those.
You're not promoting them.
And we really like to complicate things. It's like it doesn't have to go ridiculous.
And it's kind of interesting because for everybody who's having the awakening, realizing there is another way to give birth that is out of the system or not so hands on with other people around you. And then there becomes this gap of knowledge and like, oh, like shit, now I need to understand everything and I want to do all the preparations. And then it becomes this like big thing, a big to do list. And if we're not careful, we can bring in this information that actually gives us more work and puts more pressure on us and can potentially cause more harm instead of just being like, okay, my body can do this. How can I nourish my body? How can I get it to rest? How can I just go about life in a more natural way in line with like my innate drives, my innate movements? And I feel like this conversation is, and the work that you're doing as well, is very much that is our body's innate wisdom to give birth.
Yeah, it really is. It can be so simple. It doesn't have to be such a burden. Yeah. And I will say nutrition too. Nutrition is another important factor, something that we have so much control over that will benefit the integrity of our skin. And so I would focus on lots of minerals, sodium, potassium, magnesium, zinc, selenium. So think like oysters are super rich. Copper, that's another important mineral. Copper, you need to lay down that elastin to give that integrity for the skin. And collagen, collagen needs copper. You're going to find those in, but I know that oysters are are huge. That's a really good one.
We have an
Meat.
episode on nutrition, so I'll put that underneath here as well.
Yeah, good.
But I'm really glad you brought that into it because obviously the more nourished our cells are, then obviously they are going to be primed for this experience that is about to come. I always think of any moment in time when we're going through these big rites of passage. Like I always think of the pillars that, of postpartum anyway, what Rochelle Garcia teaches about these pillars of how to care for the mother. I feel like they just always should be there as a solid foundation of the rest, like the nutrition, the body work, the community. And then with that, that's a really solid foundation for going through pretty much anything in life.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And I mean, understanding that the vaginal tissue is designed to tear. It's
Mm.
there to protect you and your baby. And if it needs to, it will. And it will do so when it's done in an undisturbed physiological nature. It is designed to tear at the weakest point, and it's mucous membrane, just like your mouth. So it's going to heal very bad, very efficiently. I know many mothers who tear at home, and it's such an afterthought. They're too busy enjoying those days of postpartum. And like you said, nourishing themselves and resting and enjoying their baby, not worried about stitches and
Mm.
everything. Yeah.
So with these mothers that who have had tearing with a home birth, did they let it heal naturally? And what was the feedback from that?
Yeah, I know so many mothers that have had, maybe a first degree, a second degree. I talked to someone the other day who had a third degree tear during her rebirth. And honestly, same thing that you would do if you wanted to avoid stitches. In any case, just resting. One thing I will say though, not this myth that you have to keep your legs like super tight together, because that can actually, if you do that in the first 24 hours, that can actually fuse tissue together. It's really just the same principles. You're resting, you're laying in bed, you're having warm, nourishing foods. Maybe after a few days, you have a nice warm sit bath with some herbs. Yeah, it's really, again, it's not dramatic at all. And it's considered just part of the physiology. It's expected if it happens. And some women just don't know because they don't check. It's not required to check. And even the process of checking can really disturb the tissue while it's already starting to heal. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm really happy that you shared that because I think that will be a relief to hear that in the episode with Ellen, she says, like, don't worry about anything for like 10 to 12 weeks. Let the body do its job before we start interfering with anything. And bringing that into awareness is kind of a relief because in the world that we live in, it's always like, what can we do next? How can we fix this? How can we bring it back to normal, like this whole thing. So I feel just like sharing these kind of informations about actually what the body is doing and trusting that she will heal with the right nutrition, with the right rest, with the right support, and merging with the body of saying, I trust you. And your body's like, okay, thank you. Just feed me and I'll do the work.
Totally. Yeah. It's constant and it's bringing you right into motherhood. It's never ending. You're always having to evaluate and tune in, and I trust this process. I trust myself to heal. I trust myself to mother. It's all reflective. So
Oh, yes,
yeah.
totally. So it's like my mantra in my head. So you have an online course and you are active on social media too. So I'd love for you to share about where the listeners can find you and about your program as well that you're offering.
You can find me on my Instagram. I'm still working on my website, but for now, that's where I am. You can always send me a message if you have any questions. The link in my bio takes you to the course and more information on that. I took my time designing this course. It's very intimate. There's plenty of birth stories from other mothers weaved throughout the course. We really validate fears that do exist, but I'm always replacing it with knowledge. And we go over the reality of trauma and when we trusted in providers and when they really let us down. And also, if you are still wanting to have someone there for you, how can you really work through past trauma and how can you build trust back again, questions to ask to really get clear on your birth plan. Of course, we cover complications and really understanding and knowing how to identify certain things throughout labor and birth, and then some postpartum stuff, a lot of my opinions, my wisdom, um, a lot of raw thoughts, and yeah, just things that I think every mother can consider. It's everything I would want my daughters to go through, and all the information I want for them when they're deciding what to do. And yeah, so
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for everything that you've created. And the last part you said, doing it for your daughters, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Every time I sit down and create, it's like, what would I want her to know? And it's so funny because I realize that she's literally living this life with this information around her all the time. Like, usually she's in here recording the podcast with me, and this information just trickling in. So to them, it will just be like, they'll just know it subconsciously.
oh, absolutely. It's so impacting what they hear, even just in the peripheral. It's definitely already left an imprint, no doubt. My mom always spoke about birth. She had her babies in the hospital, unmedicated, but it was like, it was always the greatest thing she's ever done. And you can't do anything that compares to it. So that stuck with me. And I think
Mm.
there's a lot of women that are walking around carrying a lot of secondhand trauma from their mother stories or family member stories. And it's really, really sad and unfortunate because it's hard. It's so hard to unlearn and learn. So,
Hmm. Oh yeah, that's such a big one. I'm doing a private class on this to complement some of these episodes, which is on like go and ask your mother and grandmother their story. I feel grateful that I asked my grandmother before she died because I could hear in her own story how the system brainwashed her. 'Cause she had 3 children at home. But she was telling me, you have to go to hospital. It's the safest place. And I'm like, what happened? Like, where did that come from? And my mother, she gave birth in a hospital, but she said to me, I really wish I knew what you knew now because I wish I was able to move. I wish I was encouraged to breathe and not to push when I didn't want to push. She said, like, I wish I had the experience of giving birth on my own terms. And it's kind of beautiful to see the unraveling through generations, actually, and just be like, it's like a big deep breath in, like, oh, wow, like, I'm changing the course of history by the work that I'm doing. And it's just incredible. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sitting here with me today. It's been absolutely wonderful. And I'm super inspired by the way that you show up and what you share with the world too.